Hey, Serena.
Hi, Joe.
Oh my goodness. Wow, how far we've come. Well, how far you've
Yeah,
come.
it's great to see you.
It's good to see you too. So we were together at Varuna with Rachel and Lori, who my viewers will know that have already been on this podcast and we've already talked about it. And everybody's been chatting you up and saying, "When are you talking to Serena? When are you talking to Serena?" It's like coming, it's coming. So thank you.
Yeah, so it's finally here. We're chatting. Yeah,
Yes,
which is
yes.
great.
So your published name or your nom de plume is SD Hinton, and your
It
book, your
is
debut novel, came out The Brothers last year.
correct.
Last
Yes,
year.
last August, so a year ago.
And that was an interesting journey to publication. I know that when we were together at Varuna, you were there on a pathway to publishing, which is actually was the inspiration for the name of the podcast. Um, was the fellowship from Verona, but because of COVID, you had already done the work, right? Like you'd already done the work at home.
Yeah, yeah. So COVID, wasn't it fabulous? And I managed to finally get my fellowship. But the fellowship was awarded, which is called the Publishers Introduction Program Fellowship,
Okay.
run through Varuna. I'm not sure if they're running it anymore, but it certainly had been an annual thing. So that was awarded just prior to COVID in March 2020. And of course, like everybody, plans were thrown into the wind. Um, I did eventually manage to slip through the lockdowns between Victoria and New South Wales, and yeah, was able to. And yes, I mean, obviously the manuscript was up to a certain stage anyway to enter into the fellowship,
Mm-hmm.
and over that time, I'd had feedback from the publisher and had made a number of edits. So I didn't actually work on the manuscript in the end for the fellowship stay at Varuna because it was already off at the publishers. So, well, it wasn't, it had been, I'd had feedback from the publishers and I'd sent that in, but I hadn't received any confirmation back. But so I worked on something else while I was there, but it wasn't wasted time. And of course, it's always
No.
fabulous to connect with other writers. It's such a valuable experience. Yeah.
And I, like, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that it was book three, or meant to be book three. But when we caught up last year, you were either revising or working on book two. Do you want to talk about what that's like in a world
Yeah,
of
it was. Yeah, it
yeah,
was
no, yeah.
a bit of a confusing process. So, but that's writing, isn't it? So, I had in fact already written book two, what I thought was book two, and that was finished. But the publisher had seen it because I'd entered it into one of their sort of competition things. So they'd seen it and pulled it out for its voice, and so that was all fine, but it didn't really match up. After The Brothers was, finished, the book I thought was book two didn't really match up. There was a big gap. There was something missing because obviously certain things happened within The Brothers, and you couldn't really step into a normal world that I had written about for book two. So book two then became book three, and I had to write book two,
Oh,
which I felt,
wow.
yeah. So it's not a nice, most people, as I understand it, have trouble with book two, but when you're feeling under pressure, it sort of made it a bit harder. The publisher wasn't applying the pressure; I was applying pressure to myself because suddenly I didn't have a book to follow on, and I thought I did. So it was like, so anyway, so I eventually got it written, and it's with the publisher at the moment. But um, I haven't, we haven't discussed it at this point. So book three. is written. Again, I don't know whether it's any good or if it'll go anywhere, but it's written. And I've been working on book 4 for a while now. Again, kind of struggling a little bit, just not quite sure where I'm going with it. I'm a little ready to move on for other characters, I think. And so I just recently, like in the last week, have started a different version of, maybe it's book 4, maybe it's a completely different book. So I've just started that with different characters, and I'm pretty excited about following that thread and seeing if and when it goes somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, no, that all sounds really exciting. So, do you consider yourself a discovery writer, a pantser, or are you more of a planner?
Oh, look, I'm definitely a pantser, but for just because that's the way I prefer to work, not because it's better or worse or anything like
No.
that. But I do have a framework. Well, a very loose framework. Framework's probably not a very good word to describe it. It's more like dot points that I kind of think maybe I'll hit at some point. But I'll have a beginning and an end. How they connect up, I really don't know. And I think, Dennis Lehane, who's a favourite writer of mine, considers that he has a lot of trouble with plot. And so in order to overcome that issue, he develops his characters to such an extent that they drive the plot. So that tends to be how I work. So, I'll start it off, develop the characters, put them in some kind of stress, show us a little bit about the sort of, people they are underneath perhaps, or what's kind of shaping them and motivating them, and then try and get them to just go for it themselves and end up at the end. That's a very loose way of describing it, but yeah, definitely a pantser. I don't, but you still plan to some degree, and I think if you don't, there's a certain amount of work you have to do to make sure, everything flows succinctly and it makes sense, etc., and that people's motivations match up, all these sorts of issues. You have to do that work eventually. You can't just pull it out of the air. So, planners will do it to begin with. Pantsers have to do it at some point. I tend to sort of do it in chunks as I go, and then at the end, and if the publisher's involved, well, then they will certainly have input in how that plays out as well.
How does that
So
publisher
yeah,
involvement how does that publisher involvement affect the overall story? Like you're saying, what Brothers was when you submitted it versus what was actually published that left a gap. So did that mean that we lost some of the parts of the book, or was it just like a light was shining on the gap?
no, I mean a bit of both maybe. Yes, you do lose certain parts of it, but that doesn't mean to say that's a bad thing. You know,
Mm.
writers, particularly debut writers, I hadn't worked with a publisher before, um, and the genre that I write in has certain expectations from readers. So that was all a learning curve, and I never looked at it in. I'm not precious about words. I'm not. I know that the publisher has the interests of the book at heart. They want to sell books, so do I. I want my story to be enjoyed by as many people as possible. So I found their advice enormously valuable. There was, it's a negotiation. It's like, well, if that's what they suggest, how am I going to get there, and can I do it another way? But in general, there wasn't a whole lot of things lost, just a few things that probably needed to be lost,
Hmm.
and a few things that probably needed to be added. So, yeah, I think, it's a balance, it's a give and take, and we're all working for the same thing essentially. So I found the process really constructive. Yeah.
Can you give us a little more insight for authors who are looking to get their debut? They're looking for that. Could you take us through that process? Because, um, as somebody myself who's not had that experience of working with a publisher, um,
Yet,
it all feels very behind the veil. It all feels very mystical.
yeah. Um, and that's probably quite a reasonable assessment. um, because, publishing in Australia is a very small industry,
Hmm.
and there's not a lot of scope for new writers to come in. It's limited. And But it was a really interesting experience to try to learn how they did it. And it does demystify it. You go, oh yeah, that makes sense, or um, there's logical reasons why. Someone like the publisher that I used, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention them, but they're a large publishing house. They've been doing it for decades. They have international expertise, so um, they know what works, they know what doesn't work, and so it was good to learn those aspects of it and how things were put together, how your cover came together, um, those sorts of, um, and the promotional aspects, the marketing aspects. Um, Assorted expectations, what was expected of me, what was expected of them, so the different roles, how they came together. It's all a little bit, like you say, a bit confusing and blurry, and because sitting down and speaking to published writers is probably not something that happens that often for people who are writing out there in their lounge rooms and studies and stuff, and so perhaps it's a bit mysterious for them. But um, yeah, look, it was a good experience. I don't know what else you want me to say. Um,
Well, let's talk about the marketing because I do know that you were not particularly interested in social media, and you had through the process you changed the name of your social media account, I believe, right? Is that correct?
no, so I had a private page that I'd been running for a
Okay.
number of years, but
Mm-hmm.
when the contract was signed, I set up an author page. So that's all. So I run two pages, but
Oh, okay.
um, and it's
And
not. I mean,
yeah.
social media is one of those things. I suppose it's one of the thing I dislike the most. It's time consuming. It's not necessarily accurate. It's not necessarily positive. There are positive aspects about it,
Mm-hmm.
but and it's good to share what's happening. It's good, for getting knowledge about what other writers are doing and what's happening out there. That's a great aspect about it. But it can be um, a little toxic too. I'm sure we all are aware of that. Um, yeah, and I just kind of go, I was. I did the Dunkeld Writers Festival a couple of weeks ago, which is just the most fabulous festival. If you ever get a chance to go, I thoroughly recommend it. You'll love it. It's a great part of the world. It's very dramatic but very peaceful at the same time. Um, and I had the really fortunate opportunity to have dinner with a writer who shall remain nameless but has been one of my heroes for a long time. Um, and we were discussing this very topic about how much is actually really necessary and what does it change, promotional, how much self-promotion do writers actually need to do rather, and what does it change with regards to sales, with regards to reviews. I mean, we didn't solve the problems of the world, but we had this discussion, and I'm still a little undecided about how much is really necessary for a writer. I mean, a writer's core business is to sit down and write stories and to do it as well as possible. And yes, I think you need to let people know that the story is out there. But, there are some writers on my feed that, again, shall remain nameless, but I groan when their feeds come through. I need to follow them, essentially, but I kind of go, again, again, and I suppose in some ways I admire their energy for doing that, to be able to write terrific stories and, have this huge social media presence, or a very large social media presence. But it's not really my thing. I like to write, and I'll do what I have to do on social media, essentially. Yeah. It's a bit of a scourge, I think. And also my generation. My generation didn't grow up with any of that kind of stuff. So it's all like, an additional thing that you have to do. And, everybody has those things. I don't mean to sound like a whinger, but yeah, I prefer to write. Let's just put it that way. I prefer to write, and yeah.
I know we caught up last year at the Blue Mountains Festival, and you've been to a few others. That is also maybe a part of the published author life, that you get to go and do these events. Compared to social media, that more enjoyable, or is it kind of in the same level of like, well, I guess I have to do it, honestly?
Oh, no, no. It's much more, I find it much more enjoyable. I still haven't done enough of them to, become exhausted by them. Um, because, you're meeting other writers, and sitting down and talking to them, and then you're meeting other readers afterwards, and they're talking to you and telling you different things, and you're signing their books, and it's a nice kind of connect. There's personal connection, and everybody's there because they love stories. So, I find it a pretty positive thing. Festivals, social media is quite different. There's no face-to-face contact. Not everybody is there for the love of stories. So, I don't, yeah, I suppose they're still components of marketing, but I much prefer to be marketing in a festival environment, yeah.
Do you have any like good stories about meeting readers like that?
Um, I think a lot of the stuff that, a lot of people have made comments because I'm dyslexic, as are you, and so, you have an understanding of what it takes to actually conquer that, and, put it in its place, and get something, that's worthy of being read and published. So a lot of the stuff I get is feedback from that, and that's been really lovely, and it was a bit unexpected. I would often get parents of dyslexic children telling me that they find it really positive, for them to have a role model that they can show their children, to say, look, see, you can achieve, and you can get, manage the dyslexia, and become a published writer if you want. So, it's a bit like, an example to inspire the children, because I'm not sure what your experience was in school with dyslexia, but mine was pretty disastrous. In that era, dyslexia wasn't even recognised, let alone understood, and so it becomes a slow drip trauma that you live every day of your school life. So it really does a lot of damage to, a child's self-esteem, their belief in themselves, and so I think getting that feedback from parents, and knowing that those parents cared enough and understood enough to be able to help their children, to get through it, and that I could be some small inspiration in that. I think that's been the greatest feedback. I know it's not really related to the story and the book in itself, the nuts and bolts of the book. It's more about the writing the book, and I
Oh
think that's
no,
probably
yeah.
been.
As you know, I've written stories about dyslexic characters, and I've done that intentionally because when I was young, there were no stories. I was talking to, I think it was Kit recently, that there was like the pretty girl, and then there was the smart girl, and then there was, and that was it. Like you were either the pretty girl or you were the smart girl, and I was neither. I was the slightly mousy dyslexic girl who was not very smart, and they kept changing, like it was the 80s and 90s when they kept changing the name of it because they didn't want, it was all PC terms, right? So you couldn't say dyslexia anymore, you had to say learning disability, and then you couldn't say that anymore, you had to say learning difference, and then you had to say you know, different thing, and it just kept changing.
Neurodivergent.
Yeah, as a dyslexic person, it's kind of perfect because it looks like a
Yeah,
word that a dyslexic person would come up with. It's just, it's like, it's such a weird
that's
word. Like,
true.
like
Yeah, that's
this is, if
absolutely
I
true.
were,
I don't have
if I
any
were gonna,
issues with the word.
yeah, no,
Yeah, yeah,
and
and
I
I'm
own it
fine
now
with being
too.
called.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't bother me at all. But
no,
yeah, I mean, and that's interesting actually, Joe, that in the different eras, how
mm-hmm.
those who were enduring dyslexia, the different sort of influences that they had to cope with in order to, and effective behaviours of others that they had to then add to their coping abilities, to get through
Mm-hmm.
dyslexia. And it is something, I don't know, it was something that was incredibly damaging, I think, for me. Because actually can remember I was probably about 30 before I realised I was actually quite intelligent. So effective was the brainwashing of being dumb throughout my schooling that it took that long before I went, you know what, I think underneath here I actually am a reasonably intelligent person. So that's how long it took. And I think that's quite telling. And from there, it's been a long process to kind of unpick the damage, I suppose. And it was one of this, I was at, here I go again, big noting myself. I was at another festival on the weekend called the Local Word Festival here in Geelong. And it wasn't psychological
No, of
damage from
course not.
anything else. It was just the
Mm-hmm.
dyslexia. But uh, yeah, so, and I think for me, that's why I'd never actually even considered, self publishing or whatever title is on it, whether it's hybrid or I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a mysterious kind of industry, but I would never, for me, but I would never, I never considered it because uh, I because of dyslexia, I needed to know that I wrote well enough that my stories were considered publishable and that someone wanted to pay me for them. That's how I knew I'd overcome all the actual English language issues, I suppose. So I never considered anyone can publish a book. This was my thinking. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. Anyone can go and publish a book. Anyone can pay to publish their book. But to me, went nowhere near telling me that I was good enough to have a book published. So there was two different things happening there in my
I
head, and I think that
totally,
stems from.
for those who are listening and not watching me, I am totally just like this. You are speaking my language. I've been talking about this a lot, and everybody has sort of challenged me to kind of unpack why I haven't, like, it's been 30 years. So I first put my novel in somebody's hands when I was 14 years old. So you can do the math, it's been 30 years. And I got some good feedback, but I've had that, like, that's a huge experience. I know enough to know that putting, like, not the slush pile, an editor at Scholastic books. I put my manuscript in her hand, and she read it, and she gave me personal feedback. I was 14. That's huge. That's like 1%.
Oh,
Like,
absolutely.
yeah,
That's
it's
enormous.
insane.
Yeah,
But I have not gotten over the line. So I've not gotten published. 30
yeah,
years, I've been at, you know, dancing around that level. And
yeah,
why didn't I just like go and like when self-publishing became a thing, because it wasn't a thing when I was 14, but when it, when that became a thing in the 2000s, why didn't I go do that? And you are saying exactly the thing. I need somebody else to say you're
yeah,
good enough. You're good enough,
yeah. And the
because
only
the
person that can do
lessons
that,
I learned was not that I wasn't.
yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. And to my mind, the only person that would convince me I was
Mm.
good enough, because you've got all those years of schooling to being those programs that have gone down and laid down in your blueprint that you're not good enough. Um, so the only person that could convince me was a traditional publisher saying, we want to make you an offer, sign here, and here's your advance, let's get your book going, and seeing it on the shelf. Those were the only things that could ever convince me. um,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and that is true. That is true. And I realized, I was when I was talking to Lori, he said that all authors are desperate for validation. So it's not just you and me being dyslexic. Apparently, all of them are desperate for validation, and we have chosen the worst industry to get validation.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel his pain. I feel his pain and disappointment at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, it's anything in the arts is a very difficult industry to be in, but I'm not sure it's something we choose. I think it's something that we just are, and you just have to suck it up. Maybe in time it will improve. We'll focus more on the creative spirit and what it can do for society, and how it can broaden minds and improve thinking processes and appreciate beauty, etc., etc., rather than focusing totally on accumulating things and money. And the balance has swung well and truly away from the arts. It didn't always used to be like that. You look back in Elizabethan days, and artists, writers, painters were all,
Hmm.
highly sort of, well, not highly valued, but they had a different place, and it could be
Hmm.
seen, the value of what they brought was recognised. So hopefully, it will swing back at some point, but in the
I'm
moment, at the
quite
moment,
hopeful. I'm quite hopeful
yeah,
because with all this new technology, AI, creative problem solving, as well as creating art in the traditional sense, writing, storytelling, these things cannot be duplicated by a machine. So we've seen this to a degree with return to handmade craft and homemade things.
I think that I hadn't actually thought of that, but I think that's a very good point. It will highlight the difference. It will highlight what something like AI can't achieve, therefore highlight what the human element in creativity can achieve. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Spot
And
on.
in a different way that mass production damaged the arts, because I think that's what the printing press, um, art was, there was one, and and if you wanted another one, you had to copy it. Storytellers were huge because you had to have the storyteller there, or a musician was huge because you had to have the musician there. Consequently, I don't think that was a bad thing, and it was good because art for the elite is not good either. But what happened
Yeah,
was people stopped valuing it because why should I pay for
yeah,
Spotify when I can get it for free and just listen to a couple ads? Why should I?
yeah. And
Um, yeah.
again, yeah, another very valid point, I think, and it's not dissimilar to what's happened to the publishing industry and writers with regards to other methods of publishing. Um, I think, if I'm going to be really blunt about this, There are many
What?
books that have been self-published or whatever other term you want to um, attribute to them, anything outside of the traditional publishing industry that have been published by other means. So many of them, you know, Blind Freddie could tell you they should not have been published. So, you know, they will just collect dust in your garage. I think by the fact that so many people, you know, anybody effectively can publish a book regardless of its standard, regardless of its interest, regardless of the person's experience behind it, the message behind it, whatever, has just flooded the market with these types of products, these items, and that has also diminished the value of the book. And that's spread through to then diminishing the value of the writer. You know, anybody can call themselves a writer. What kind of a writer, the value you are as a writer is, you know, a completely different thing. But I think, you know, dispersing, like you say about streaming music and any kind of art form, I think does reduce its values, and I think the book is part of another example of that.
There's a lot of people involved. It's not
Yeah,
just that the
yeah,
writer is creating, but like you have worked with the marketing team, the publisher, the editor.
yeah. And I think some of it stems from the fact that I'm not sure that people who've never written a book understand what it takes to write a book. Oh,
Mm,
and they perhaps view the task of writing the book as the only thing you have to do. Once it's written, that's it. There's your book. You know, that's just the first part of it. You know, and any writer who's been traditionally published will tell you, well, then you've got to get it published, and then you've got to get the book out there, and then you've got to get it marketed, and then you've got to do your next one. So, you know, it goes on and on. So yeah, I think sometimes it's a miss. It's just not fully understanding, people not fully understanding what it actually takes. And part of this festival I was at on the weekend, I was on a panel of a self-published, an indie publisher, and a traditional, which was me, and another person who was a mixture of both. So they publish a little bit of their own stuff and they do traditional stuff as well. So, you know, that sounded like something that was probably a bit more of the future. It will be a mixture of things. But I think, you know, you need to have an understanding of the industry, and I think the best education field for that is being traditionally published. And then once you have those skills, then yeah, sure. If you think you can do it, then you know, self-publish in some form. But one of the self-published guy who's only a young guy, you know, immensely talented, and he'll get there. But he was making a comment of, I didn't realise that writing the book was just the first step, you know, and because then he put it out there, he paid and all the rest of it. But, you know, now he's understanding that he has to market it. Well, how does he do that as an unknown, uncredentialed, essentially, writer? You know, what
mm-hmm.
distinguishes him from any other writer that's doing the same thing in their lounge room or study? So, you know, he's realising, but like I said, he's young and he's learning, and he's realising what else, the other assorted aspects of getting a book on a shelf. So, but I thought it was interesting going the combined route, you know, of a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So,
You mentioned characters. Let's go back. You said that how you kind of find your story is you really develop your characters and then you let them guide the plot. So, can you talk us through like what that looks like? How do you develop those characters? Like this book that you've just started, how you don't have to tell us about the characters, but how did you develop the characters for this book, the new characters?
okay, so I develop them as I go, as I
Okay.
need them. So at
Okay.
the moment, there are only two characters.
Hmm.
because it's really early. I shouldn't really even bother speaking about it. It's probably so insignificant, but I'm only 8,000 words in. And they come to life as you write, as you write about them, as you put them in different environments, under different pressures. The other character has to respond. So you think, well, how are they going to respond? Okay, they'll do this. They'll be upset, or they won't be upset. They'll be angry. They won't be angry, whatever. And so then the character starts to come to life there, because the way they respond to a particular situation. So I will give you an example. The protagonist is a female this time, and she's going through the bins of someone to find out about this person, and she should not be doing this, But it showed us that she's got a really curious intelligence, that she can't really control that yet. She just has to know. So that tells us a little bit about her. But she's going to be found out, and how she's going to be found, the reaction of the person that finds out will tell the reader about that person. Will they understand? Will they help her go through the bin? Will they get cross and tell her she's, I don't know, a nosy person, sticking a nose in other people's business, go mind your own life, leave everybody alone. I don't know. So however they respond tells the reader something about the character that's responding as well. So as we progress through the story, I kind of go, yeah, okay, well, we need to do this and this, but let's see what the characters do with it. If I put them in that position, how will they respond? So, yeah, they just come to life. I mean, I don't know too many, I suppose the planners might, but the character is fully formed when they first hit the page. The characters in The Brothers were not. I had some really rough, guidelines for them, and everything else got fleshed out as the story got fleshed out. And then, of course, you've got the power to go back and change something. So maybe, in chapter 3, you had them doing something in particular, but by the time you get to chapter 20, you don't want them to be doing that. You want them to have done something else. You go back and change it. It's not set in concrete. So, yeah, everything's fleshed out as you go. I just have a few key points, and then I think, I pause and think it through, and work out what to go from there. And once these different characteristics, their core beliefs and values, their history, once those things start to come online, they're coming online sort of as the story is building. So by the time you get to where all the action is happening, so the peak of activity and discovery and what have you, the characters are pretty much online, so you know what they're going to do when you give them that final or that big situation that they need to deal with. So then they will take it off from there. And so I think that's how it kind of works. But there's a lot of flexibility, of course. But you build them up, you hit them with the crunch point, and then they take it from there. They show you what they're going to do with it. Yeah. And that's a great thing. I love. Yeah, because they have to.
Theme.
Yeah, they have to bounce off each other. And they have to be able to, one has to drive certain things for the other. So in The Brothers, we had, Jake was obviously the protagonist, but we had his trusty sidekick, Stocky, who was able to support, was able to pick up the slack, was able to fill the gaps, and likewise with Jake, because no character can have it all, and they have to be flawed and have to learn something from the journey and grow in some way. So if they, they can both grow in different ways and support each other and fill the gaps in the process. So yeah, I always start with a pair. Yeah. So I've got two pairs now. I mean, just two people, not two pairs, but a pair happening in the one I'm writing at the moment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Um, and when when the ideas for these pairs, did Jake come to you and then you were like, Stocky, I need another guy and I'm just gonna like pull this guy out, or did they come to you together as like these? I'm interested in this relationship. I want to tell this relationship. Like, who are these guys through this relationship?
No, Jake came on his own. So he'd been sort of hanging around the periphery for a while, I think. Uh, and he didn't come fully formed at all. All I knew was that I needed a particular type of person that could behave in a crime thriller way. So, if you receive these anonymous threatening notes, I don't know about you, but I would probably take them to the police. I might go and stay somewhere safe. That's the sort of thing that I would do. But that's not very crime thrillery. So I had to have a character who would have the confidence and the experience, the skills to
Mm-hmm.
go, no, I don't trust the police. I'm going to handle this myself. And that only really gave me the choice of two types of people, and that was, or two groups of people, and that was police and soldiers. So I didn't want to write a police procedural. It just didn't interest me at all. So it had to be a soldier. So I knew Jake was a soldier, and that he had the ability and skills and experience to be able to deal with this threat. So if he has the skills and abilities, he has to have learnt them, and so he needed to have a military career then, and because it was a contemporary story, that made him a contemporary military veteran, which put Afghanistan and Iraq in the picture. So then I had to research those conflicts. What kind of soldiers were there? What did they do, etc., etc. So all that became part of his story. Um, and then there was the part of his story at home, and how did those two things fit together? And I think that's when Stocky appeared, because
Mm-hmm.
he's like the cog in between that can make those two worlds, the civilian world of his past and the military world of his present, well, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
work together to get this problem solved. So then Stocky, I spent a lot of time down the coast. I know the sorts of characters that live down there, I suppose, or not everyone, of course, but you've got to pick out an interesting character for a story. You can't put a whole lot of, uninteresting characters in a book. Readers will get pretty bored. Um, yeah. So I thought, well, yeah, okay. He lives down the coast. He's going to surf. He's got to make a living. How's he going to do that? He loves surfing. He can run a surfing school, and so, well, if he runs a surfing school, so it just, it's layer upon layer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Was The Brothers the first like completed novel, or were there a lot of novels that were written before The Brothers? And how did The Brothers get to be the one that you decided to submit to the Verna Fellowship?
Yeah, I think you'd probably say The Brothers was about my fifth full length manuscript. Um, the others, they may come to light one day. I'm not so sure, but they were my learning, they were my schooling, really.
Mm-hmm.
Writing those. I'm not saying that they're not good and that they may not be able to be beaten into line at some point, but I don't even look at them anymore. They're on an old laptop. I don't even. They're around. I could find them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but so but they had been written essentially at a time when I was doing a lot of travelling. So, all not just in Australia, but, in other parts of the world, and experience a lot of different things. So The Brothers was the first full-length manuscript that I set completely in a local setting here in Australia. And that was, the one that was deemed to be appealing, I suppose, to the Australian industry. Yeah.
Did you submit the others ones previously?
Yep. So, Joe, I have always submitted everywhere. You
Yeah.
know, um, I've always had, even up to the brothers, and with the brothers, I had at least two um, competitions or submissions, or I was at least two opportunities that were in the works. As
Mm-hmm.
you know, it takes a long time to get a response once you've submitted something, whether it be for a competition or in an unsolicited manuscript through a publisher's website, for fellowships and opportunities. It takes a long time to get a result from that. So if
Mm-hmm.
you sat back and waited for every result of everything that you sent before you sent the next one,
Mm-hmm.
you'd be decades in the waiting. So I always had two opportunities happening at a time. And as one was rejected or failed, I would add another one to the list. And so we would just be, I would constantly move through. That was one of the hardest things when I signed for the brothers, was to stop doing that, to stop putting it out there and seeking opportunities. It really was. I was so used to doing it, so used to looking at, oh, yeah, that's coming up. Okay, I'll enter that. What are the guidelines?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd work on that submission. So, and I think those things, it's really important to keep doing that, because you have to get your work credentialed, essentially, and that's the way to do
Mm-hmm.
it.
Mm-hmm.
um,
That is
yeah.
interesting that you had trouble because I'm a bit of a serial submitter. I'm not. I used to have like something would come back, I'd send it out. Something would come back, send it out. I'm more strategic now. I'm going to actually write for that deadline, and I'm going to put it in my calendar, and I'm going to create something that fits those guidelines.
Yeah, look, I didn't write specifically for a particular submission or a particular
Mm,
fellowship. I wrote because that's what I wanted to write. I wrote The Brothers because I
mm,
wanted to write it. I loved writing it. I loved the characters. I wanted to see how they survived, what they got through, That's why I wrote the book. So once it was done, then I submitted. So I didn't write for a specific goal other than to
mm-hmm,
finish the book. And if it was good enough, then I would start submitting it. So at the end, when it was complete, I had it professionally assessed. Um, the professional assessor, when I'd said to her, look, I can't, I don't know, maybe, we'll see how it goes, but I can't.
hear
And
that.
her first comment back was, this is your break. So I knew then that I had something that I had to do,
Mm,
because I valued her feedback. I've used her a number of times. She's got a wide experience of the industry, and she does it for a living. So I thought, okay, well, I've got something. So then I thought, well, if I've got something, I'll polish it to the best of my ability and start submitting. So I think you have to, there comes a point though, if you keep submitting, and you've, particularly in this country because the industry is so small, um, if you've been rejected from pretty much everywhere, you put it aside. It's time to
mm-hmm,
let that one go. You thought it might have been
mm-hmm,
good, you really enjoyed it, you loved the characters, but no one else is really wanting it at this time, and write
mm-hmm.
something else. Some of the things, you would probably agree with this because you've been writing for such a long time as well. In the early stage, writers get very attached to a particular story or character, and they can't let it go. That comes, I think, with time. You have to be able to let it go so that something new can flow back in. When you're so invested in a story and characters, that's all that's in your head. You're living it, breathing it, writing it all day, however your process works. So there's no room for anything else. So if you've explored every avenue and it's not happening, let it go, put it aside, start something else, let something new come in and develop again. I know you kind of, as a writer, the new doesn't happen overnight. You've now got to spend another 6 to 12 months to write another manuscript. But it's better than flogging a dead horse.
I'm blessed to write quickly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was just at Varuna for a week, and I hit somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 words a day. I enjoyed it. I love it. So I love playing in the space. So now I'm having fun. But if I'd hated it, I would have gone, okay, well, that's not for me. So
well, you wouldn't write it. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that you had a whole other career as a nurse, and that is
okay.
that is probably
I had a
really,
whole other life.
A whole other life.
A
Wow,
whole other
okay.
life. Yeah. Completely different life. And I don't use that at all loosely. That's exactly what it was.
Wow.
Completely different life. So I had the mortgage, the husband, the kids, the nursing career. I used to work in anaesthetics, so I was an anaesthetic nurse, which also encompasses not just theatre work with anaesthetics, helping the anaesthetist, but also in the recovery room post surgery. I did that for decades. It never felt like a particularly good fit. I enjoyed it. It was interesting, but it felt like something I needed to do in order to have the mortgage and the kids and, educate them and blah, 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 all the costs that are involved there. It was more, something like that. I wanted to write when I was in my 20s, in my early 20s, but I had dyslexia. I couldn't spell. So it was like, how can you possibly want to be a writer? You can't spell. So, and you have very limited life experience in your early 20s. So I really crushed that desire. That was actually very difficult. I still remember how difficult it was to this day to put that desire down. It hit me again in my early 40s, the desire to write, again really strong, and I knew I didn't have the what it would take to put it down again. I knew I had to abide it, and by that time computers had arrived. So, and they've been a huge bonus for a dyslexic such as myself. I was able to learn at my own pace without judgment, and away we went. But it still took another 20 years to get published. In that time, though, life changes. Your children grow up, and relationships don't necessarily last. So here I am, 20 odd years down the track, no longer with the mortgages and the kids and the anaesthetics. I'm now very, very, very different. My life there's not one aspect that is the same, except that I still have 2 children out there, but they're adult children. They're grown, and they have lives of their own. And I write every day. Writing is what I do now. But yeah, so it's been a long road. I sometimes wonder if I'd known then what I know now and what it's taken, and essentially the price of it. Would I have still done it? And eventually, of course, it's like, well, you don't really have a choice. It's like what we were saying before. You don't choose to be a writer or an artist or what have you, do you? You know, it kind of chooses you.
Mm-hmm.
And to not do it is probably a bit foolish. You're not exploring and you're not being curious and you're not trying to, have different perspectives on things and do things that give you pleasure and joy. So, yeah, that's it. There you go. There's the story.
That's a lovely story. I've got a hypothetical. If you, Serena, could sit down with 20-something-year-old Serena and 40-something-year-old Serena and all have a a vodka or a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or whatever you're drinking, what would you say to them? What would you if they said to you, I'm struggling with I've got this passion for writing and for all the reasons you've mentioned, I don't think I should follow this passion. You've got the 40-year-old you that said, I can't put it down again, I got to do it. And you got the 20-year-old you that pushed it down and everything that took. What do you say to those two women?
Mm, mm. Well, I think the 40-year-old woman, I would say, yeah, she made the right choice. Um, the 20-year-old woman, I think she made the wrong choice, but she made it for the right reasons. Yeah, look, I would probably say to her, don't put it down. It's going to be tough, but don't put it down. Yeah. I would very much have liked to have been in this position 20 years earlier, where I knew I could have had a much longer, more diverse writing career. Obviously, um, you know, it's going to be limited by years. So I would, but that's probably I'm probably being a bit selfish, a bit hard on the 20-year-old Serena because she didn't have computers, she didn't have any support. Yeah, and she was still hadn't worked out that she had a brain. She still had a dyslexic mentality of I can't, I can't, I can't. So I'm being a bit hard on her, but if someone could give her some support, if she could find someone that would actually go, you know what, you can do it, and if you need anything, I'm here, then maybe she would have made a different decision. But it would have been great if she'd been able to. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question. If you could um, provide that support to 20-year-old Serena, knowing it would cost you some of your writing time, so knowing that some of your days, some of your hours that you spend writing have to be committed to helping this woman get to where you are faster than you got there, would you do it? Or would you go, no, wait till you're 40. I'm
No,
not
I'd do it in a
sacrificing what I
blink.
have now.
Yeah, no, I'd do it in a blink. Yeah, I
Mm,
wouldn't even consider not doing it. That
that's
person may
lovely.
still have to wait a little bit longer before, life experience can catch up, and before their ability can get to the point where they can actually articulate that life experience and what it meant. I think that's a different journey. But certainly for writing ability, yeah, in a blink. Like I said, I've just been come off a co-writing project of someone who is dyslexic and ADHD, who doesn't have the ability to write, and I've just spent an enormous amount of time supporting him to a certain stage, and it's a rewarding thing to do. But yeah, I'd certainly go back and help that dyslexic
Oh,
person. Yeah.
that's lovely. That's lovely. Why did 20-year-old Serena think I can go to school and train to become this specialized nurse, but she didn't think she could write a book? Why? Like, because I feel like that seems scarier from a dyslexic point of view. You got people's like lives on the line. You get a number wrong in the operating room, people die. I get a number wrong in my life, and I get a busy signal on a phone.
Yeah, look, I didn't choose nursing, would be the answer to that one, Joe.
Mm.
I grew up at the end of the era where essentially women had three choices, and that was teaching, secretary, or nurse. I didn't like school, it didn't like me for obvious reasons that we've already discussed. So I didn't want to go back there. How could I teach someone when I couldn't learn? So teaching was out of the question. I certainly didn't want to sit at a typewriter, although I sort of do now, but I didn't want to type all day and with earphones in just typing stuff. That just would have made me brain dead in a very short period of time. Um, my mother had always wanted to do nursing but hadn't had the opportunities to. So when I picked the best of the bad three and said, well, maybe nursing, she thought that's great. I think it's a great thing to do. And she was looking at it in terms of being able to provide for myself in the future. Nurses will always get work, they'll always get paid. So she was looking at it in practical senses of her times. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so she enrolled me. The next thing I knew, I was being interviewed, and the next thing I knew, had started nursing. So it really wasn't something that I chose. And throughout the sort of the first, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, I suppose, I did try and break out and do, I always had creative hobbies, and um, I did try and sort of do other things, but it just didn't really come off. And then next thing you know, you're involved in a relationship, and you're getting married and you're thinking about kids, and life sweeps you away. So I was a bit of a passenger, I'm afraid. That's not anybody else's fault. I'm not blaming anyone. It's just
Mm-hmm.
the kind of the times, the era. You didn't pursue personal goals largely. I mean, there were, of course, some fabulous people out there who managed to have that really strong burning beacon that saw them pursue exceptional careers in whatever field. I wasn't that strong burning beacon.
I'm the age I am, and I'm not published either. So you could argue that maybe if I had you know, done the good thing and actually thought about practicality,
Yeah,
not a
no,
shiny
no.
beacon
I think
either.
what you did, yeah, no,
You did what
absolutely.
you
I think
did.
what you did is right. And,
Mm.
it was my experience that then had me never force anything on my children and just try
Oh,
and,
lovely.
follow what and support them in what they wanted to do. And I never inflicted any kind of guidelines or framework other than education, and then,
Hmm.
go and do whatever it is you want to do afterwards. But yeah, and that came from my experience. Look, it was not an easy experience either. You talk about feeling a level of trepidation having people's lives in your hands and stuff like that. You're in a team, so there's not an individual responsibility. Yes, you can make an individual mistake, absolutely, but there's always a team around you. But I do remember, when I was going off, I trained at the Alfred in Melbourne, and I hated shift work. I hated night duty, and um, I do remember my boyfriend at the time driving me to a night shift, and I felt so sick in my stomach. I so didn't want to do it. I so didn't want to go there. And it was, looking back on it now, I know how strong my core being was telling me, stop, stop, don't do this, do something else, that I felt so sick I had to get him to pull over so I could throw up in the gutter. I
Oh.
just, seriously, it was such a mismatch. But there's no point, pondering that now, really. I mean, I recognise it, and I certainly give it more value than I did then. But, a bit like your mum, I'm really pleased to have finally been able to achieve something that I wanted to achieve, and that meant more to me individually. It gave me more joy and pleasure, and a feeling of contributing, and yeah.
Well, it gives me hope as a fellow dyslexic and a fellow person on the journey. It gives me hope because um, being able to sit at the desk and write all day just sounds like a dream. Just sounds wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, and
That's
it's
what
a
I want.
luxury that you
I want to
need
be able
to
to do.
remind yourself of. Yeah, you need to go, how
Mm-hmm.
lucky am I to be doing this? It would be really good if I could make a living out of it, but I'm lucky to be able to do it. Yeah, yeah, and you'll get there, Joe. That's the other
Mm.
thing about the desire, the passion and the drive to actually write. Um, the it's the long game. It's not a quick fix, and that's where I think a lot of people who write fall by the wayside. They tend to think that it'll happen much faster than it does, and so I suppose time weeds a few people out. But with you, it has not, and your determination has still as consistent today as it was, decades ago, and that is really the key thing. Yes, you need the ability, but you learn that as you're being determined. But the determination and drive to keep going every day, to keep doing it, to keep seeking opportunities, to keep believing even when you don't believe, all these sorts of things, that's the most important factor, I think, for
Thank you. Thank
eventually
you.
being published. Yeah. You're
Um,
welcome.
I've learned a lot of lessons in the last few years, and one of the ones that really was a turning point was when we were at Verona, and when I met you, a dyslexic, so and in more commercial fiction, not literary. It tends to be very literary at Verona heavy sometimes, and I
Right
had to
on.
make a decision: do I want to keep doing this, knowing that on the other side of this goal is more work, is more waiting, is more desperately seeking validation, is more um, things not living up to my expectations, it's more disappointment. Am I fighting for this to just do more of the same? And the answer was yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
The like you say, chooses you. It's like I couldn't, like, doing the other would be worse.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Not
No.
giving up would be
That's right.
worse.
That's right. And sometimes that's the only way that you can make a decision is to go, well, I may not be wanting to do that, but I don't want to not do it. It was like when I took on the autobiography, it was like, I don't know if I want to go down this road. This is going to be a really dark road. And who knows the sort of ramifications it may have. But I don't want to not do it. I don't want to not take the opportunity that it has presented. So I think sometimes that's the way you make your decision. You know yourself enough to go, yeah, but I can't not do it. And the other thing is you have all this amazing knowledge about it. So, you're so well prepared to do it because you understand you have done so many other different creative things within the writing field. You're running this podcast, you're speaking to, Rachel and Laurie, whom, as you know, I know quite well. And, they're lovely people with enormous insight and experience. So you're gaining all this other knowledge along the way. So that really puts you in good stead, and you will get there. It's just a matter of you getting the break. But I should tell you though, when I was waiting for the publisher to make their final decision on the brothers, so whether they were going to make me a publishing offer, and I had entered in a couple of other things, and they weren't really coming off, and I kind of thought, you know what, I'm going to need to take a break here. I'm going to need to pause. I need to step back. I need to re-examine. So I was pretty burnt out at that point. I'd had 20 full-on years of not just learning how to write, but writing 5 manuscripts, pushing them, at every opportunity. It had been and I'd paid a lot of. There'd been a large price to get to that point. So I was quite burnt out. When you saw me at Varuna, I was pretty burnt out. It was like, yeah, that's okay. I love it and all the rest of it. But I'm going if this doesn't come off, I'm going to step back and reassess. I wasn't necessarily going to stop writing, but I needed time to recharge and rethink and maybe redefine directions. So, and then it happened. So, maybe, maybe
It's written in the
I'm the
universe.
bringer of bad tidings, Joe, but maybe you need to get to that point, where you just go,
You hit rock
I
bottom.
can't do any more, because I knew I couldn't do any more either. So I knew my writing was good. I knew my determination was good. I knew I'd been pushing. I knew I had an opportunity, the biggest opportunity that I was going to get. So if it didn't happen, then it didn't happen for a reason, So, yeah, you come with all
Wow.
that knowledge and experience, don't you, that you've gained over decades. And, yeah, you'll
Um,
get there. Absolutely no doubt. Absolutely no doubt that you will get there.
Thank
Simply
you.
because you were so determined and you were very creative and lateral about that determination. You're not, when I say determined, I don't mean, walking over dead bodies to get what you want. I just mean, you're determined to
Not today.
learn and experience and do lots of other things at the same time. So, yeah, you'll get there. I have no doubt.
Thank you.
And
You can have a great manuscript. It can be fantastic. It can be wonderful. You've written this like dark, gritty crime thriller. It's really, it's like hairs on the back of your head stand on end. It's all like creepy. But right now, what they're looking for is a cozy mystery. Then you're out of luck. It's
yeah,
like, but
yeah,
it'll come around again. The cozy mystery
yeah,
will go out of fashion, and then it'll be the dark gritty again. So
yeah, yeah,
sometimes it's just like when you're in the genre space, I think
yeah,
specifically, it is in that kind of we're not looking for that right now. That's not what we're looking
yeah,
for the next cozy mystery, or we're looking for the next dark thriller, and you've written a cozy mystery. Sorry,
yeah,
like it
yeah,
doesn't
that's right.
matter.
Yeah, no. I'd like to thank Jo. She's a great host and she's got some fabulous writers coming up and that she's spoken to as well. I'm not necessarily putting myself in that category, but certainly she's got lots of great connections and well worth having a look and a listen to her podcast, which is Publishing Path Podcast. So make sure you subscribe, follow, like, all that kind of stuff. And you can catch them on YouTube and Spotify and most other platforms that you usually get your podcasts from. So give her a shout out and have a look at her content. It's excellent. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Before we go, if I've got a question from my last guest who asked and not knowing it was going to be you. So her question for you is, if you could be remembered for one thing, what would it be?
Yeah, one thing's hard. I'd like to be remembered as being for my curiosity and my determination. So it's two things, but they're kind of interlinked. I think I've got a very curious nature that I inherited from my mother, who also had a very curious nature. Didn't have the opportunities, unfortunately, to see it to, all sorts of weird and wonderful areas. But so yeah, probably that, my curious nature. How's that?
Lovely. I love it.
And I
Love
have a
it. And do you
question.
have a Yeah, you have a question
I
for the
do.
next guest? Go for
Yeah.
it.